So my name is Dana Ripper. Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I'm with the Missouri River Bird Observatory. We are hosting the at-home screening of Microplastic Madness, and also this panel discussion. And so the few of us that are on this call have been planning and talking about this for a few weeks, and I'm really excited that tonight is finally here, and we're going to be able to hear from some experts about microplastics. I hope everyone got a chance to see the movie and enjoyed it. It is really wonderful, and it's probably the only movie about plastic that's genuinely uplifting. So that was really neat. So here are our panelists this evening. We have Debbie Lee Cohen, who is the executive director and founder of Cafeteria Culture, the organization involved in the making of Microplastic Madness. She's the co-director and co-producer of the movie. We have Missouri's own Rachel Bartels, who is the founder and director of Missouri Confluence Waterkeeper. And we have Jenny Davies, also with Cafeteria Culture. And Jenny is the public and environmental health director for Cafeteria Culture. She's a physician and environmental attorney, and she will be returning to us on the night of October 18th with an in-depth look at the threat plastic poses to human health. So you can sign up for that. I'll put that in the chat later in case you haven't already registered for that. So this is a webinar format so that folks know. So you can see and hear all of us, but we cannot see and hear you, and you attendees can't see and hear each other. So you can have dinner or, kind of whatever you're going to do during this time when you're watching, but please do interact by putting any questions in the Q&A or the chat. I've enabled the chat so that everybody can correspond with each other. I believe we can also, unmute you as an attendee. So if you want to raise your hand and actually, speak and say something and ask questions of the panelists, we can do that too. So we're going to have some introductions by our panelists and then go into a Q&A. So I'm going to stop sharing, and Debbie Lee, if you want to go ahead and take it away.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Dana, for having us, for highlighting the movie and the Microplastic Madness campaign and action. Thank you, everybody, for joining tonight. Thanks to all of you who already watched the movie. And just to let you know, if you haven't watched it yet, we will make sure that it's possible for you to see the movie. I'll share information with Dana afterwards. Where the movie was finished in 2019, pre-pandemic, and it wasn't a planned thing. I do come from a filmmaking background, and I worked in documentary, as Atsuko, my co-director, co-producer, also had worked in filmmaking, but we did not plan to make the movie. We actually were running a program at PS15, the school that's featured in the movie in Red Hook, Brooklyn, and it was part of an EPA-funded project. And the project we were doing in 3 schools in 3 different neighborhoods, all with pretty intense challenges in the community and in the school, daily challenges. And it was from a competitive trash-free waters grant, and all the schools were amazing and all the kids were amazing. But when we walked into this school, we just knew that we had to make this movie. And typically, as you see in the movie, we're already bringing cameras in. So it wasn't like, day one, we're like, oh, we're going to make a feature documentary. It wasn't that at all. It was really like, we'll document this movie that was part of the grant, but the grant didn't give us any money to make a movie. And we thought, well, we put little things on YouTube. And after a few weeks, Atsuka said to me, DL, we have to make a feature documentary. And I basically said, there's no way, we can't do this. We don't have the money. And we didn't have the money. And then she came back to me. I was like, well, maybe we make a half hour. And she's like, no, this has to be a feature documentary. We have to tell the story. And she was so right. And we knew at the minute we walked into that school that there was something special and that these students had a story that needed to be heard. And that the way they told the story was truly unique and had not been told. And I had worked at HBO Family, and, many documentaries with kids. But so I really understood that the way even that our students would express their feelings about environmental justice related to microplastic madness and other issues growing up where they were growing up in this very frontline community, urban community, was a story that was worth telling. And I tell a story also that we made this movie on a shoestring budget because everybody has a story to tell. And all of you, if you're here tonight, you're here probably because you're interested in, you have your own connection to somehow to conservation, to plastic pollution, to something that brings you here tonight to take this time, or this afternoon, depending where you are. And we all, most of us have devices, and most kids have devices now, most schools do, and that there are so many stories to tell. And one of the most important things is to share your stories and to use that opportunity to tell your stories. We had this opportunity, we had this grant, so telling the story with the data, with the community outreach, with the take action, you know, is like to be able to create something that was uplifting. Yes, we still had to craft the movie and craft the story. And believe me, there were a lot of scenes that we wanted to put in that aren't in. And it's really hard to craft that story. But we were so touched by the kids. And even in the classroom, you know, at a certain point, they became our partners in making the movie very, very quickly. They understood that, you know, we didn't have big cameras, we had small cameras. And very quickly they understood that they needed to wait a minute when they were going to answer a question that the teacher asked, or, you know, we were in the classroom, they would wait for Atsuko to get there with the camera. And, you know, it was challenging. You know, you're teaching, making a movie and documenting at the same time. So there were some real challenges, and at a certain point, you know, also not having any money to finish the movie, and we still did it. You know, we found a way. We did a lot of it in-house. We did some of it in a public library, in a community room, recording the sound in between the toilet flushing, literally. But all that's important to know, because again, we all have stories. So I encourage you, you know, to ask good questions, and you're free when we have the Q&A, please feel free to ask me anything. You don't have to feel inhibited, really. Ask me whatever you want. I'm totally fine with it. Thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, Debbie Lee. I know that we do, in fact, have some questions that came in from folks even before our panel tonight. So we'll definitely get into the Q&A. And again, folks, if you think of things, like you don't need to wait till the end. You can go ahead and put them in the chat in the Q&A right now. And Rachel, I believe we're going to hear from you about some of the work that you're doing in Missouri.
Yes. And I just wanted to say thank you, Dana, for inviting me to do this. And the movie, I was just blown away by how beautiful it was and uplifting. And as someone who's been working in the world of plastics and microplastics, it's not often that the news is uplifting. So thank you for that. I will share my screen. I have just a few slides with pictures on them that I wanted to share. Okay, are we good?
Looks good.
Okay, I have to minimize. Okay, my name is Rachel Bartels. I'm the founder and director of the Missouri Confluence Waterkeeper. We're a grassroots organization focused on clean water in the state of Missouri. I just want to show you a few photos and talk about some of our projects, the ways we're tackling the plastic problem here in the state of Missouri, and how you can get involved. I just need 1 second. I have some pop-ups. So one of the projects we've been working on is the Trash Free St. Louis. It is a one-year pilot project where we install these in-stream litter collection devices in 3 waterways throughout the city of St. Louis. If you're not familiar with these, the one in the middle on the top is called a trash trap. It's a trash trout, and it's a cage style design. And the other 3 are boom style devices. And all 3 of them are put in smaller streams and rivers. And the purpose is to collect trash before it travels any further downstream and degrades and breaks down into smaller plastics, which are harder to clean up later. Part of this project, we are focused on Upstream Solutions, so collecting data about the kinds of trash that we're collecting to try to figure out where some of it is coming from and come up with solutions to prevent it from entering our waterways in the beginning. this project is it's funded through the EPA Region 7 and the St. Louis Aquarium Foundation. And here are a few more photos that show some of the trash that it's collected. The top center, they're cleaning out the trash trout, and the other ones were collected from booms. So as you heard in Microplastic Madness, scientists estimate that 80% of the plastic debris in our oceans originates from inland sources. So the graphic on the left is the Missouri River watershed, and you can see the state of Missouri and how it drains through this little point just near St. Louis, where it drains into the Mississippi River. So I feel like we're in a perfect location here in Missouri to try to prevent some of this trash from making its way into the ocean. And the photo on the right is the confluence of the Mississippi and the Missouri rivers. Another initiative we have is our Microplastics Monitoring. We have volunteers. Some of them are stream team members, some of them are schools, and they go out into the various waterways throughout Missouri and collect samples from rivers and streams and lakes, and then bring them back to our in-house lab where we can analyze them for microplastics and count the plastics and the types to determine if they are plastic nurdles or fibers or the styrofoam. My computer's being slow. We're taking all that data and we are putting it online and using this citizen or community science to create a map and ultimately show if there are problem areas throughout the state that ultimately can help us either do more monitoring or targeted cleanup efforts. Like in Kansas City, we've been finding lots of plastic nurdles. So that's kind of helping us target some of our advocacy efforts. We're also partnering with the University of Illinois to run some of the samples because they have much better technology than us, and they can actually determine, they can see much smaller particles and actually determine chemical composition of some of the plastics. Another project we have going on is a 3-year study funded by the Missouri Foundation for Health to test surface water and drinking water for microplastics, nanoplastics, and then other contaminants of emerging concern like PFAS and pharmaceuticals and herbicides, pesticides, things like that. But the major focus is on the plastic particles. So these photos were from a day that we were sampling on the Mississippi and the Missouri rivers at the drinking water intakes. And the photo in the center, you can see the close-up that there was even plastic floating in the rivers as we were collecting these samples. So we've already gotten the first 2 rounds of data back, and we are working on getting that together so that we can start to share that information. And now we are sampling the taps and households and going around to various places in St. Louis City and County to test. And one of the parts I loved in the film was when they were sorting the trash by how degraded it was. So I wanted to include this photo of this highly degraded plastic bag in front of the arch. This is on the Mississippi River. And just mention that here in Missouri, we have a ban on plastic bans. So it's a preemptive ban that doesn't allow for local jurisdictions to decide for themselves how they want to address the problem of single-use plastic waste. So as we're developing these initiatives and doing these projects, we are very much focused on collecting the data so that we can use that to inform policy decisions and, better advocacy work. just working towards single-use plastic reduction. And then I wanted to throw in a photo. I have a daughter, she's in 5th grade, and this particular trash trap is located in our neighborhood, in our local watershed. So she gets out there and helps clean up and helps us raise some awareness about it. And that's all I have.
Thank you, Rachel. Very much. I'm so glad to know that this work is going on in our state. I mean, really, someone needs to be doing it, and I'm just so happy to hear about all of the initiatives that you're doing at Waterkeeper. So I think, Jenny, you're going to say a few words really briefly, right? Because we have you undivided on October 18th, but I think you're going to say a few things right now, right?
Yes, thank you, Dana. I'll keep it really short. Hi, everyone, and thank you, Dana, again. I'm thrilled to be here. I love the Missouri River Bird Observatory and what Dana and Ethan are doing with this beautiful place and with their platform. I'm Jenny Davies, and through the magic of Zoom, I'm speaking to you from Portland, Oregon, but I'm a Midwesterner at heart. I was born and raised in rural Ohio. I'm a physician, environmental attorney, now public and environmental health director for Cafeteria Culture. And as Dana mentioned, I'm returning on October 18th to talk with you about the health effects of plastics, which is the area that I study. Since Microplastic Madness was released in 2019, well, since that time, the science around microplastics and nanoplastics has exploded, and it's super interesting. So when I come back on October 18th, we're going to start with the chemistry of plastic, and I promise it'll be super fun and interesting, not like your high school chemistry class. We'll make a polymer together, and that way you can understand what plastic is. And that's the critical piece. That's the piece the fossil fuel industry wants to hide from you. This is the piece you need to know so that you can understand how plastic affects your health. And just very briefly, it's a double whammy. Plastic hits us in 2 ways. First, while we're using it, thousands of plastic chemicals that can leach into our food and drink, and I'm not exaggerating that. We'll go through the data. And then after we're done with it, after we're done using our plastic, we throw it in the recycle bin or the trash. Well, where does it go? Not where you think it goes. And so we'll look at that data too, the production, use, and fate of all plastics ever made. And just a little preview, and you probably can guess, most of that plastic is now in tiny pieces that don't biodegrade, and it's everywhere. Air, water, and soil. We eat it, we breathe it, and I'm going to tell you that science. It's shocking, but the good news is we can protect ourselves, we can protect our kids, and we can put a stop to this, and I'm going to tell you how. The second reason I want you to come back, and please invite others, is this is really powerful information, and it's going to be your greatest weapon to fight to change all this. We have learned that folks who may not be so concerned about the environment, or maybe they're concerned but not concerned enough to change their lifestyles or to advocate for change. Well, once those folks, even conservative folks, learn about health threats from plastics, they get on board. So it's going to be your best weapon, your best tool in talking about plastics to your neighbors, your family, your school, policymakers. And hey, if you want your legislators, especially there in Missouri where you got to get those preemption laws rolled back, this is going to do it, the health information. So I look forward to returning on October 18th, and we'll talk about the health effects of plastics. And I would ask that you hold I know there's a lot of health questions, if you can hold them until October 18th, I promise you we'll get into the weeds on that. Thank you.
Thanks, Jenny. It's scary stuff, but it's really, really important that we all know and understand it. So Jenny and I have been on other panels together, and I learn a ton from her every time. And you mentioned, chemistry, biochemistry, etc., and you make it very, very digestible. So no pun intended. I'm going to go ahead and start with some questions that we received in advance from folks. And again, please, folks that are on here right now, throw questions in the chat or the Q&A for us, or raise your hand. So one I got in, I thought it was pretty interesting, and I'm just going to read it in its entirety. So this person said, back in the old days before styrofoam plates, there were washable plates and silverware on washable lunch trays. I did substitute teaching in Iowa and Missouri in the past several years, and there are still schools that wash everything. When did the larger cities switch to all disposables? Could they not return to washing plates, silverware, etc.? So I think this is a Debbie Lee question from your experience with the schools.
I think a biggest shift really happened in the late 80s, early 90s during the recession, where the industry pitched to schools, this is a way to save money. And I know my dad was in that industry of selling disposables, so I heard that pitch. And he could have sold anything, but that happens to be what he sold. And I think that a lot of school districts, and we could see that that could happen, that could come again, that where people, the budgets are so tight for school food, and we don't really value school food as a culture in this country. Some countries, value it much more than we do. And as a country, we're still fighting over a penny here, another penny or two to improve food for children who are hungry. Our children, which is hard to believe. The White House just had their conference on food and nutrition, which is exciting, and maybe something good will come out of that and some commitment. So yes, there are still schools, but there are problems, especially in urban school districts and in larger school districts. And part of that problem is also a labor issue, which now we could also take the labor issue. For years, people said, we can't afford the labor, we can't afford more time. Now we can look at it as what we're calling a cafeteria culture, the green new meal. People are now looking at more holistically these intersecting issues that are, labor. We need more labor. And actually, our school food service workers, who are our frontline workers we saw during COVID, and they're the ones who know who's hungry, who comes into the cafeteria is hungry. Many of them need more hours. They need better benefits. It's an opportunity. On the other hand, in New York City in particular, when we started in 2009 as Cafeteria Culture, we started as a grassroots campaign to get styrofoam out of schools. There were only 30 schools out of 1,700 at that time that still had dishwashers that worked. Well, actually, even those 30 didn't even all work. And then there was the issue around maintenance, around soap, around who was going to repair. So that whole culture had shifted. Can we shift back to that? Most certainly we can, but it's a long shift for some districts, for some of the bigger districts like New York City. And we can see we'll be doing one of our first reusable pilots soon. We're super excited about that. And there's an openness to it, but it's huge. And just like getting rid of styrofoam trays, as you saw in the movie, and moving to the compostable plate, it's not the ultimate solution, but it is a step towards the right solution. And when we're talking about scale, it helps scale the solution, which is really, really critical. There was also a question or Eileen wanted to know about plastic-free lunch day. Can I say something? I just wanted to say that, because I didn't really take up all my time in the beginning to talk, so I wanted to hear your questions. One of the things that's really exciting about this movie is that this movie has wings. So, after the movie was made, you see the last thing was that the styrofoam bill went through, the implementation of the styrofoam ban went through in New York City, which was really incredible. It had been sitting on a judge's desk for I don't know how many years. There have been 2 lawsuits brought against New York City for that bill. And that was huge. And then a New York State bill passed. But one of the things that's really gigantic was in the fall of 2019, in September, when we premiered this movie, there was a group of students from the movie on a panel with Stephen O'Brien, the school food director, who's in the movie also. And they asked him, when can we do a citywide, meaning a New York citywide plastic-free lunch day? And Stephen, I think at that time, was like, well, maybe in a couple of years. This was pre-pandemic. And the students said, well, of course, they said, we can't wait a couple of years. You're 12 years old, 5 years is almost half your life, right? And so there was this great conversation. And then New York City School Food actually committed in May to do a plastic-free lunch day citywide in New York City in May 2020. Then the pandemic happened. They were still committed. Last May 2022, we did have a citywide plastic-free lunch day, which meant in 750 elementary schools, there was no plastic served with the lunch, except for technically in the milk cartons. The milk cartons do have a layer of plastic. So that was gigantic for New York City. And then out of that, what has come is that the Urban School Food Alliance, a nonprofit that represents 18 of the largest urban school districts across the country, has partnered with Cafeteria Culture on a national day. And here's the information. I'm going to put it to you right here in the
I got it. I put it in there already.
Okay, thank you. And that's to sign up, but here's the website. You can get all the information. Schools can host screenings for free, all K through 12 schools. Actually, we won't turn anybody away. It's a great time. It's a great way. This movie can get people excited. Often we find that when we're presenting to students and they see the movie and we ask them, you know, what action do you want to take? Chris, because Atsuko and I made this movie and we've been teaching all these years. We were so intent that the movie would have a take action ending. And most often what kids say is, I want to do plastic free lunch day. That's the most common answer. So that's super exciting. And now we have this opportunity. And that day on November 2nd, it's a little late if you're connected to a school or a school district or any organization. We now have some government offices, I believe, who have committed to actually participating that day also to support students. You can do any plastic free action that day. It could be as simple as to saying that day, we're going to not allow any plastic bottles into the cafeteria or no plastic bags in schools. And one other thing I just want to say about the preemption is what we look at in terms of strategy. This preemption is, you know, it's not just Missouri, there are other states. And one of the exciting things about leading these policy changes within a school, so an institutional change within a school and school district, is that you can see how easily and how quickly you can scale something out when you don't have to wait for it to be voted on. We have students who are actually the users of the system involved and asking to make that change, and they have the data to show it. They're doing waste audits and they show the data. They present it to the city council. It's very hard to say no to them, right? And it's a great way, especially in states where there are preemptions, to actually push forward change and build a bigger consensus around change.
So hopefully Julie, Julie E, you put the question in the Q&A about accessing the film. I hope you saw it in the chat. Jenny has put, I think it was you, Jenny, that put a link. It's still, we kind of had a screening before this panel, but now it's open until November 23rd, it looked like. So really excellent opportunity. And just very, you know, again, very, very uplifting. You don't have to like prepare yourself for this horrible doomsday scenario of movie watching. It's really fun, really fun.
Thank you.
And
please email me if you have any problem. Just there's my email address for all of you. Just let us know if you can't access the movie. We'll just share a link with you.
That's an easy one to remember too. dl@cafeteriaculture.org. I've got a number of comments and questions here that are for, it looks like some are for Rachel, some are for Debbie Lee, some are for both or all of you. So one comment was, let's see, is there plastic in drinking water? And this reminds me, Rachel, of your slide, of course, showing plastic in the river right by the drinking water intake. So is there plastic in drinking water? Then, you know, I will just drink bottled water from now on. So do you want to make a comment on that?
Jenny's really, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I'll just say from our preliminary data that we found, and even the research, and I know Jenny has some great links on this too, that bottled water is so much worse. It has way more plastic in it than any kind of tap water. So far in the city, we've found levels that are not alarming, considering the exposure we have through the air and just in our food and everything else. So I would definitely say do not switch to bottled water for many reasons.
Yeah, I wanted to add to that. Tap water, though, is polluted with microplastics. That's really important in understanding the ubiquitous nature of these particles, that they get everywhere. So yes, it is in your tap water, but it's much worse in bottled water. And there have been a number of studies now that have shown that worse, what's in the bottled water are heavy metals such as antimony that actually leach from the bottle, the plastic bottle itself, and many other plastic chemicals that I'll talk more about when I come back on October 18th. But yes, if you have a choice between tap and bottled water, take your tap water. And if you're concerned about microplastics or any of the other contaminants that are in our tap water these days, reverse osmosis filter has been documented of removing at least the microplastics from the tap water.
So here's again a question for anyone really. Isn't it good that plastic breaks up into tiny pieces so they're not unsightly litter anymore and we don't have to see them? So isn't that it breaking down?
Well, it never goes away. So that's the problem. I mean, and Jenny will explain that really, really clearly in her talk on 18th, and maybe she wants to add something here now. I'm a little, I should say I'm intimidated with Jenny. She'll correct me later if I'm wrong. But really what's interesting is it's like everything that you don't see is often more dangerous, just like pollution that you don't see. If you can't see it, sometimes it's more dangerous. So we don't know it's there. And only in the last year, as Jenny was saying, how much research is coming out. Part of that has to do with only recently, there's the technology, there are the tools to be able to see nanoplastics. So now we can prove, or scientists can prove, that those nanoplastics are there, that they're in our blood, that they're in our organs, that they're in our food, that they're basically everywhere. And so, no, it's not better that they break down, because in fact, for many of the smallest, the bottom of the food chain for zooplankton, that means that those tiny pieces of plastic are entering the food chain at that point, which is really, really dangerous. And so it's bioaccumulating, basically.
That's
How do I do, Jenny? I have my
yeah, no,
it's hard when I have my
right.
MPH MDJD.
That's exactly right. And the other thing is that just because we can't see them, I think the take-home point is it doesn't mean that they're not there. There's this long, they just get endlessly fragment. And we've learned more since 2019. They don't stop breaking up when they get to the 5 millimeter size, which is about the size of a pencil eraser. They keep breaking up into teeny particles called nanoplastics, less than a micrometer in size. And actually, I was reading, I'm sure this is true in rivers and fresh waters, but now the latest data about oceans is that most of our plastic is now sitting at the bottom of the ocean and not dormant. It's still interfering with life. And zooplankton and phytoplankton, those organisms that form the base of our food chains and food webs.
So speaking of that, there's a couple questions here, and I wish I knew the answer. And Rachel, maybe from some of your research, you might know the answer, but do microplastics harm river animals like fish or other river animals? Are birds affected by river plastics? And I mean, we've all seen horrible pictures of things like birds trying to feed their young plastic fragments, like maybe not even actual microplastics, less than 5 millimeters. But I don't know of studies in wildlife actually looking at, say, microplastics or their chemical components in blood. So do you know anything about this, or have you seen research, or are you guys doing research?
It's a great question. We've all seen the articles, the stories about the sea animals and wildlife and their stomachs, even in the film, the fish, full of plastics. And when they are full of plastics in their stomachs, they can't eat nutritional things. We do have a project that we're working on with some groups here in Missouri to study fish. But that is something that's probably going to happen early next year. I think Debbie or Jenny can definitely speak more to the specific harmful effects on the animals. Mm-hmm.
Oh, I said, go ahead, Jenny. But I could just say that that's partially with Dr. Chelsea Ruckman, who's in the movie. That's what her research is about. And it was really, bringing it back to the movie also, it was really something to have the opportunity to go into her lab and to understand the depth of that kind of research and what they're finding. And of course, they have done so much more since then. And it's not just her, other ecotoxicologists in other parts of the world, but she is one of the foremost. And you can follow her on Twitter and see what she's doing. But her research is, that's what her research is about. And Jenny probably would like to add to that.
Well, I always think about harm to animals, and there's a whole spectrum of animals, and I encourage people not to think broadly about riparian areas in the water itself. There's the animals that live in the water. There's the birds that live on or near the water. There's animals that swim in the water. All of them are affected by the plastic pollution, the water plastic pollution. So what happens is, you've seen the macroplastics, I think it was shown in the film, animals get entangled and drown, or are not able to pursue their prey, and then they starve to death. Or animals eat the plastic and then they die of starvation because their guts are full with non-nutritive substances, or they're poisoned by the plastics because the plastics themselves are made of toxic chemicals. And this happens at the lowest levels of the food chain, again, in the aquatic food web and food chain. We're talking about phytoplankton and zooplankton. There's this beautiful microscopic photograph in the film. I think it was a zooplankton, is that right, W. Lee, that was eating a piece of plastic. So, and Dr. Chelsea did mention that they're not doing well. The zooplankton, it's probably a combination of things: plastic pollution, and climate change, ocean acidification, all those things. And even though the film, I want to raise a point, even though the film really focuses on the ocean because that's was close to the students, this affects inland waterways equally, and there's phytoplankton, zooplankton in waterways, inland freshwater as well. And so the same types of things happen there too.
And Dana, the part of the question about the human health, have there been any studies, made me think of the tests that groups are doing related to the PFAS chemicals, and how when they find it in the water supply, they're doing blood tests on people. And depending on, over the next couple of years, what kind of data we can find about our drinking water supply and microplastics, I would love to see that be another part, or kind of a direction where this study can go, because I think that would be fascinating. I don't know of any studies, Jenny or Debbie, maybe you do, but that would be great information.
It's so interesting, because I think the initial research that was done really showed death by starvation, and now people are getting more into the idea of the plastics. There's two ways that chemicals are involved with plastics. Well, plastics are made out of chemicals, and so they leach them. But the other thing is that they act like magnets in the environment. So for the pollutants that already exist, like in the Missouri River, for example, those plastics attract pollutants and concentrate them. So then when an animal eats that little piece of plastic, it gets poisoned, or slowly poisoned over time. It's more likely to be a very slow kind of chronic thing. Same thing happens with people. And so you were mentioning PFAS. Rachel's got a lot of attention lately. I just want to say that's only one of 10,000 different, and I'm not exaggerating, it's 10,000 chemicals in plastic. So I just want to make sure folks understand the PFAS role. It's in the plastic itself. And it's also in the water. It got there from other things. So when folks are finding PFAS in your river sampling, it could have come from the plastic, or it could come from another source to get there.
Related question in the Q&A: do plants take up / absorb microplastics?
So yeah, they do. And and I'll talk a little bit more about this too. what's really freaky about all of this is that, you know, microplastics and degraded and nanoplastics, and these particles are so tiny and so light, they act like a gas. And they're kicked up and they circle the globe. And then they drop down again. So they drop on the plants, they drop on the Missouri River and other water bodies. And we breathe them in, and animals breathe them in. So they literally are everywhere. And what did you ask me, Dana? I was leading up to it and I forgot your question.
Do plants take them up?
Right. So soil contamination of microplastics is huge, and it comes not just from the air, but it comes from, I don't know, out here in Oregon, and it's really big, those plastic coverings that row covers that farmers use to keep moisture in the soil or suppress weeds. So you have these big plastic row coverings. And then some recent data about fertilizers. And even like plants, when you buy in the store, you see the little green pellets that are fertilizer in the plants. Those are actually slow release pellets that are covered in plastic that breaks down and gets in the soil. And then there's the sludge that comes from the wastewater treatment plant that's full of nanoplastics and PFAS and stuff. So the soil is incredibly contaminated. So people are just now starting to look what happens, and with the soil contamination, we know that it kills earthworms, it kills fungi, and things that we need to have healthy soil and grow things. It appears that plants take them up with their roots. I saw a new study this week, plants take them up from their leaves. And it's still infancy. We're not really sure. I've seen some initial preliminary signs say they think it's not a problem. Plants can clean the plastics. I just can't believe that's true, knowing all the chemicals that are in those plastics. But I'll look into that a little bit more before our talk on October 18th.
Actually, you mentioned those green pellets and fertilizer. We had a trash trap where we kept finding tons of them, and we were cleaning them up, and we realized there was a nursery uphill that was storing those bags, and they were degrading and opening and washing into the trap. So that was one problem we were able to solve.
So what did you do, Rachel? Did you go and talk with them and they were like, oh, we won't do this anymore?
Yeah, it was great. People are really into it and receptive. It's been a great outreach tool to get people involved. So yeah.
And I also wanted to ask you about the nurdles. You mentioned when you were talking that you're finding nurdles in a particular area. I think you said it was around Kansas City. And I wondered if you figured out what the source of those nurdles was, and if you were able to do something about it.
That's a great question. It was, I think they're coming from the Kansas River, because we were finding them at Caw Point, which is the confluence of the Kansas River and the Missouri River, right on the Kansas-Missouri state line. And so there's the Kansas Riverkeeper. We've been talking about it, trying to figure it out, and we think we have a pretty good idea, but it's going to take a little more research and definitely more sampling. So it was we kind of started this right before COVID, so it delayed some of our community engagement and volunteer recruitment a bit, but now we're getting back into it. So hopefully I'll have an answer for you soon.
I'm also thinking that maybe, I know it was explained in the movie, but the movie was so packed with information. I was hoping Debbie Lee or Rachel, you could explain what nurdles actually are. And then Rachel, maybe where you think they may be coming from.
Debbie, you can take this one. I think nurdles, from my understanding, are a byproduct of the plastic production process. So they're the byproduct when they're making other things out of plastic. So you would tend to look towards plastic manufacturers if you see pollution like that. There's an organization out there called Nurdle Patrol, where they'll send you vials and information, and you can go out and collect samples and try to find nurdles on your own too. But Debbie, do you have more information on that?
Not much more than that. I mean, really, there are people. There was the person in Texas who spent 20 years collecting these, tiny little nurdles, to win a court case against a manufacturer there. And it's not just from the source of manufacturing, it's also from transportation. There's a lot of leakage. And again, it goes back to the question is like, well, you can either look at it and say, do you put a Band-Aid on this and say, we've seen it. We've seen for how many years that advocates have said, improve your wastewater systems or your, manufacturing plants so that these amount of nurdles aren't being released out into the environment. And ultimately, it's the same thing. It's like we have to stop making plastics. It's like it's not being solved. We've known about it long enough. Maybe not the general public. I mean, now people are beginning to know it. And, I never knew about nurdles until I started making the movie. And then I went out to the beach and I couldn't believe in Red Hook, on the beach right by the school where we found nurdles. We found all kinds of things. And you think like, well, you wouldn't necessarily be looking, like you wouldn't like look through the sand like that. And then you see it and you think like, wow, like yes, pre-production pellets. It's like you can't believe it when you first find your first nurdle. You think, I can't believe I found a nurdle, and then you start finding them, and how shocking that is.
I'm going to share screen really quickly to show this picture. So this is, if folks remember, the cargo ship that sank off the coast of Sri Lanka last year, and like, I mean, if you want a nice close-up of what nurdles look like, there's some in this fish, but this is their beach because this cargo freighter was carrying millions of pounds of these nurdles. And so when it sank, that was one of the worst parts about it, right? Remember, folks were obviously very concerned about the fuel, the oil, and the explosion that happened, etc. But like one of the worst environmental parts of that cargo ship sinking was the nurdles.
I think it's a good reminder that plastic is a global problem. So it'll be made in one place, they extract the oil, goes to a refinery. It's in the refinery where all these chemicals are added, and then they're made into little pellets. And then those pellets are shipped somewhere else to a factory to make the actual product themselves. Maybe that other factory is across the ocean, or in this case, it sounds like, Rachel, there's some plastic factory farther upstream that's shipping the nurdles, or maybe it was a truck or something and somehow there was leakage. But somewhere nearby there's a plastic factory making these pellets, and they were shipped or on their way maybe down the Mississippi somewhere. But it's a global problem. We're all linked by this and we're all affected by this.
I would just like to mention at this moment too that it's intricately related to our overall fossil fuel problem. So plastics are, one of their main components is fossil fuels of various kinds. Currently, it's most commonly ethane from a byproduct of fracking, hydrofracking. And so there are very powerful interests, because there's this fossil fuel component, there are very powerful interests that want us to keep using plastic and want us to use more plastic and want us to use disposable plastic, so we throw it away and buy more stuff. There's a question in the Q&A from Michael. Hi, Michael. Obviously, the answer is to reduce the amount of plastic in use, but until we can win the appropriate number of hearts and minds, is there any technology on the horizon that offers promise for trapping or sequestering plastic?
Wow, I think I'd turn to Rachel. I think what she's doing is awesome. And I just want to say, because we get these questions, I think Debbie Lee gets them too, about what about that worm that can eat plastic? And I just saw there was one yesterday again. And I love that. I'll try to put it in the chat. That picture from Story of Plastic, where you have the overflowing bathtub and the tap's on full blast, and someone's trying to scoop out some water, which is to me, that represents these other kind of aspirational solutions with the fungus and the worm eating. But I think the place to catch them, I think what Rachel's doing is awesome, because I don't know what else you do. and I'll talk more about it but you could throw them in your recycle bin, but they're likely not to get recycled. They pile up at these recycling stations. There was an article about how they're catching fire spontaneously, these big piles of plastics that are just piling up because, they're fossil fuels. And even though they've been made with lots of flame retardants, they're still combustible. So these plastics are just piling up everywhere. And I guess
can I add to that also, but specifically to Michael's question about the other solutions, is that also there's a danger. And I get asked this question all the time in almost every Q&A. Somebody asks that question, what about all these solutions? And the dangers, and we saw that happen with, now I can't remember the name of the project, that, millions and millions of dollars went into that big floating thing to capture plastic. And it was very sexy, very appealing. And he gave these great talks and he got tons of money. And yes, it brought some attention. I got more emails about that than anything. But sadly, that's money that if it had been focused on upstream solutions, just waste management, how many countries, and even the way the US and Japan are two of the biggest waste exporters. So even just looking at how we're dealing with our own waste and looking at that as a solution before like something that we're going to invest, many, many millions of dollars and get people behind, that's a false solution. And there are a lot of what I call false solutions right now out there.
I absolutely. I mean, definitely the solutions upstream. I think, by time Rachel's organization's in gear, a lot of the damage is already done. And what she's doing, her organization is seriously helping to mitigate that damage. And I'm so glad she's there, and more of that work needs to be done. But the solutions are all upstream. And
Diana asked a question here. Some of the efforts to reduce synthetic fibers in the waste stream are a good interim push. And in Europe now, there's a manufacturer that's come out with a washing machine that captures its percentage. It's not all of the fibers, but it's also about design, and really like the fast fashion and the fashion industry in general is, years behind on this, years, and they need pressure from us, and that's really national pressure and international pressure that, there's so much money in that industry, and there's so much pollution, so much more than even microfibers, and really that most people still aren't aware of, or people are just becoming aware of. But when you think about it, some of the solutions aren't even that complicated. And that was a part of the movie that was really complex. We went back and interviewed Rachel from Rosalia Project, I think 3 times, to try and get an answer that, it was hard to formulate, especially at that time when we were finishing the movie, because what you don't want is to be able to say, oh, I'm just going to throw out all my synthetic clothes and now buy cotton clothes. And it does come back to the same thing that the students say in the movie: use less stuff is number one, is really important. And looking at design and the aspects of design, in this country, and really advocating for the brands that you like. There are a few brands out there that are doing great work. There are not enough. And, and also just the amount of clothes, like you look in your closet and you think, oh, I'll give this away to a secondhand store, and then I'm not throwing away, which is good, because textiles are a huge percentage of our waste stream. I know, at least in New York, I don't know nationally, but people but then even that, you give things away and you assume they're okay. And there's more awareness now, even in the secondhand business. There's just so much stuff. And then where does it go? It goes to a country in Africa where it's being burned. Basically, there's no use for it. So to really understand, to really look at how we consume as a culture, and look at the design of the products that we buy and how we can improve the design. And of course, I come from a design background, so I'm obsessed with that. But some of it's not that complicated, really. So thanks, Diana, for that.
Yes, if we still have time, I'm actually working with one of the senators here in Oregon for about a bill that would require filters on all the new washing machines sold in Oregon. They tried to do this in California, and it was voted down a couple of years ago because the sponsor thought, oh, microfibers, what's that? And that's not a problem. So we're going to try and do it here. I think they're going to try and do it. And they actually called in Dr. Chelsea Rockman, who was in the film. Sorry, I'm getting a lot of sunlight from the late afternoon there. And she came and talked with us. And she's done some great studies. If anyone would like I would highly recommend her study. She's done the cutting edge on which filters work the best. There are some new washing machines. It's really unclear how effective they are and how that's going to work. Samsung, I just saw something about that the other day. But the filters will definitely work, and Dr. Chelsea's done that research. But again, that's a downstream solution. And yeah, it's better than nothing, but what we need to be doing is looking upstream. Well, I do want to say it's interesting. A lot of one of the other bills that gets floated is labeling clothes. So that, you buy clothing, it's got, this is a synthetic piece of clothing and it's likely to shed microfibers in the washing machine or something like that. But you can better believe the textile manufacturers have come out big against those bills, and they've all gone down big time. So
with just a few minutes left, we're going to do a really, super simple question lacking in complexity. Not really. I did want to mention that my friend Eileen put in the chat, thank you, Eileen, for bringing this up, beyondplastics.org, which Eileen and I are both a part of, has really great resources. It's an excellent website for all kinds of things. Eileen just wrote that there's EPR bill templates on there, amongst other things, but great
just
stuff.
To let you know, we were thrilled to have Judith in our movie. Judith also,
yes.
We worked very closely with her since 2009 when she was the regional director of EPA when we started Cafeteria Culture as Styrofoam Out of Schools. She was one of the first, she held a roundtable meeting, and that's how I first met her. And also EPA Region 2 funded some of our projects, including the project that this movie became, and even Judith recognizing the value of media. And so that the filmmaking, that our part of our grant was documentation and understanding the importance of video documentation of students telling their own stories, which is really important. So Judith we work closely with her as Cafeteria Culture with EPR, and also I'm on her advisory board.
She's amazing. So really, her class, if folks have the chance to take her class, she does it online via Bennington College in Vermont. It's excellent. It'll give you a lot of good background for your own advocacy. So I think, we're at 7:30, we'll wrap up soon, but if anyone wants to comment on how all of us as individuals, what we should really do to make a dent in this problem.
I gotta speak here. So, I'd like to think about a specific framework that works for inside our brains, but also you can advocate for this. It's called the Essential Use Framework, and it's actually adapted from the Montreal Protocol that was used to phase out CFCs back in the 80s and 90s. Some of us remember. It's a chlorofluorocarbon that was destroying the ozone layer and was leaking from refrigerants and things like that. A lot of the consumer products that CFCs are in were essential, really important products, and there were no substitutes for those. So people didn't really know what to do. They saw the ozone layer, big hole growing. And so they came up with this framework. There's 3 layers to it, and I'll talk about it more also on October 18th, but I can't recommend enough. You can always Google Montreal Protocol. But now this is called the non-essential use framework. So the first layer is looking at what are non-essential plastics. And those are defined as plastics that have really they're not important plastics. The only reason they exist is because there was a market opportunity and a company capitalized on it. So this is a lot of our foodware. We don't really need these plastic clamshells for the most part, and these plastic plates and bowls that we live for a very long time without all that stuff. And there are great substitutes for it. So those are the things, that's where you start. And look around in your own life, and because it's great to start thinking like that. Then the second layer is substitutable plastics. Those are plastics that may be more important, but you have substitutes for them. Like you go to Starbucks and you need a cup to put your coffee in. Well, just get a reusable cup and stick it in your car and carry it around with you. Then there's a third layer, and those are plastics that are important. We need them, and there are no substitutes. And that's where the research should be right now, in trying to come up with substitutes. But it's a good way to kind of organize in your brain and assess your world. And then when you go to talk with your legislators or people at school, policymakers, I know Cafeteria doesn't sweat. Plastic-free lunch day is all about going to the cafeteria and talking with the food directors there, the food staff there. Which of these plastics is not essential? Which can we find substitutes? And so one of the things that happens in the cafeteria, school cafeteria a lot, is those condiment packets. And we actually have some documentation about cost savings in cafeterias if they get rid of the condiment packets and they use the squeeze bottles, or they plop a little bit of ketchup or salad dressing or whatever on a plate with a spoon, the amount of cost savings by getting rid of those silly condiment packets. So that's, go ahead, Darla.
Another way to look at that in a simpler way, if that sounds a little like overwhelming, you're not quite ready to look at the Montreal Protocol yet, you can just, we have a website that's really for families, like how do you look at your own use first? So does it matter? This is the question that people ask a lot. Does it matter that I individually do something? Of course it matters. And by starting with doing it yourself, that's also how you become more informed. People see what you're doing, you influence other people, but also, and that's why we like even that we made this Recipe for Change website page. It's under our movie. It's part of the movie resources that we share, because as you're looking at, okay, what do I use every day? What do I not need? What are the things that immediately I can say, oh, I don't need to get this at the food store. And then what's your next step? Can you go to your food store? Can you talk to the manager at your food store? You're a regular customer. You spend a lot of money there. There's a lot of petitions for Trader Joe's, Whole Foods. What about the store you go to? And even just talking to the manager and saying, I'd like to have produce. I like to have my bananas outside of plastic bags, and it's not offered here. Something so simple like that. And then going on, and we talk about it's like how you find those levels. And in a way, it is actually how many of us become involved in change, whatever policy change. It's like something touches you personally, and you realize it's like, wow, I could make this difference. Like, why aren't my neighbors doing it now? You say, why aren't my neighbors doing it? And you say, oh, I can help make that happen faster. And not everybody's necessarily an organizer, but we are necessarily consumers. And we all have, most of us have the ability to vote. And when you get to that level, when you get to that point also for policy, that's really important. And policy isn't always in legislation. And that's what we teach at schools, and that's part of what still, it still excites me to wake up every morning and work with cafeteria culture, because it's actually hands-on teaching children, teaching students, how to use data to inform policy, how to connect with your neighbors on a topic that maybe they don't really want to talk about, but how even learning to communicate with people, how to talk about people who are in positions who might not really want to hear your complaints or want to hear about change. They just want to get their job done, how to talk to them, how to convince them. And those are really lifelong skills and important for all of us.
Rachel, any last comments on that topic?
No, I think that was great information. Yeah, I think it's personal choices, reducing single-use plastics, but it goes beyond that. We have to get more involved. There was a bill last year in Missouri to try to reverse the ban on plastic bans, and it didn't gain much traction, obviously, because we're in Missouri. But, pay attention to that. Just try to speak up more, contact your elected representatives, talk to people about it. And I think a lot of people aren't aware of this stuff, and share this movie. This movie was fantastic, and it touched on so many aspects, from like stormwater and CSOs to, just all of it. I loved it. So yeah, just keep talking about it, I think.
I agree, Rachel, and I wanted to emphasize, find out who your allies are in the state legislature there, because I'm sure there are many people who would like to see change, but they're afraid to speak out because they don't realize the amount of support they may have from their constituents. And so you guys need to let your legislators know that you have their backs. That'll give them a little more political courage. And then I'm going to present, as I said, some health data that may help you to sway some of the more conservative legislators. But I would just keep working with them and showing support. Absolutely.
Rachel and Debbie, Lee and Jenny, hopefully, I think you all see the chat. You've been putting some stuff in it, but there's some folks giving you compliments. Such a good panel. And yeah, the movie is awesome. One thing to mention is that cafeteria culture has resources for educators. So, help us get this movie into schools and have kids see it and their teachers see it and, hopefully their parents see it as well.
And please, everybody, join us on November 2nd for Plastic Free Lunch Day. It can be where you work, in your office, or with any community group. It's a great opportunity to support students. And even if the school or school district in your community isn't doing it yet, you can maybe start and maybe get a little piece of publicity and encourage the school to hopefully join us for the next Plastic Free Lunch Day. There will be more. And we have seen one small change can lead to the next. So we really do encourage you to take, the movie shows that too. Here are these kids in one school, 5th graders, and now this is going nationally. And I hope that's enough inspiration in itself to encourage you to lead one action and hopefully inspire to let that grow. Thank you all so much. Thank you, Dana, Rachel, Jenny.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. I'm throwing my email in the chat really quick. If anyone has any questions, wants to be hooked up and you didn't get other people's emails previously, because we've had a lot of chat, and there's Rachel's as well. So yeah, just let us know.
And I also wanted to mention we have some volunteer opportunities if anyone's interested. And I think Missouri River Relief is doing some plastic brand audits, so they might be a great organization to get involved with too. They're doing a lot of this work.
Thank you for bringing that up. We're doing that with them. And I appreciate you mentioning that. October 15th in Jefferson City. There is details on MRBO's website and also riverrelief.org. Yep. And so, yeah, I'll volunteer, Rachel, with your organization. I'll do sampling. I'll do sampling in this part of the state. All right. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank you, Rachel and Dana, for the great work you're doing. Thanks for having us.